talking about here on my channel right now. It's all about Justin Baldoni and Blake Lively's.
Welcome back everyone to the channel. This is Lars Harry, and today on Coravanta we have quite a story to unpack, because after months of speculation, rumors, and online chatter about the state of Blake Lively and Ryan Reynolds' marriage, the couple suddenly decided to make a very public appearance together. And not just any appearance either. They showed up at a Wrexham AFC match in Wales, sitting together in the stands, smiling for cameras, holding hands, leaning into each other, and putting on what many people online are calling a very deliberate display of affection. For a lot of viewers, the moment felt less like a casual day at a football game and more like a carefully orchestrated piece of public relations. The reason people reacted that way is because the timing of this appearance is impossible to ignore. The last time the two of them were seen publicly together before this was reportedly back in November of 2025. That is a long stretch of time for a celebrity couple that usually thrives on visibility and brand partnerships. When months pass without sightings, fans begin to speculate. And that speculation grew louder and louder as people started wondering whether the couple might be quietly heading toward a divorce. Now, of course, none of those rumors were ever confirmed. But in the world of celebrity culture, silence often invites more questions than answers. So when Blake suddenly appeared in Wales, sitting beside Ryan at a football match and looking very affectionate on camera, the internet immediately took notice. Cameras caught them laughing, leaning into each other, and holding hands as they watched Wrexham play against Chelsea in the FA Cup. On the surface, it looked like a supportive spouse showing up for her husband's team. But to many observers, the scene looked a little too perfect, almost like it had been designed to send a message. And that message seemed to be very simple: everything is fine. But as the game unfolded, the story took on another layer. Wrexham initially showed promise during the match, even taking the lead at one point. Fans in the stadium were excited, and there was a moment where it seemed like the team might actually pull off an upset against Chelsea. But as the game continued, the momentum shifted. Chelsea regained control, scored again, and ultimately knocked Wrexham out of the FA Cup. By the end of the match, the excitement had turned into disappointment for many supporters. The team is currently sitting in 6th place in their league, which means they are still technically within reach of the playoff spots that could lead to promotion to the Premier League. However, nothing about that path is guaranteed. The season could still go either way. Throughout the match, though, cameras repeatedly showed Blake and Ryan sitting together in the stands. And Blake, according to many viewers who saw the footage and photos circulating online, appeared to be extremely affectionate with her husband. She leaned into him, wrapped her arms around him, and seemed very focused on maintaining that close, supportive presence. Some people interpreted that as genuine love. Others saw something else entirely. Critics online argued that the display felt overly performative, almost like the couple was trying to convince the public that their relationship was stronger than ever, and that perception became even more pronounced when people began comparing this moment with another recent event involving Blake. Just weeks earlier, there had reportedly been a legal settlement conference connected to ongoing disputes surrounding the wider Hollywood drama that has been swirling around certain industry figures. During that conference, Ryan Reynolds did not appear publicly alongside Blake in New York. Many observers noticed that absence and questioned why he wasn't there offering visible support. Yet here he was now, comfortably seated in Wales at a football match while Blake had travelled all the way across the Atlantic to join him. That contrast raised eyebrows. If Ryan was unable or unwilling to attend something as serious as a legal conference with his wife, why did Blake feel compelled to fly overseas just to attend a football game? It created a strange dynamic that people online quickly began dissecting. Some commentators suggested that Blake might have been trying to demonstrate loyalty and solidarity by showing up for Ryan's team. Others speculated that the trip was part of a broader strategy to reshape the narrative around their relationship. Ryan, for his part, has reportedly been spending a significant amount of time in the United Kingdom over the past several months. He has been working on a Netflix production titled OLOEs, which is currently in production and being filmed across various locations in the UK. Because of the filming schedule, he has been splitting his time between Wales and London, and according to some reports he has been there for roughly 4 or 5 months now. That extended stay abroad naturally means he has been physically separated from his family for long stretches of time. So Blake traveling to Wales might simply have been a chance for the couple to reconnect while Ryan was working overseas. But again, because everything involving celebrities is viewed through the lens of public image, many people didn't see it that way. Instead, they saw a very carefully photographed moment designed to send a message to fans and critics alike. And then there was Blake's social media post after the game. Despite Wrexham losing the match, Blake reportedly shared photos from the day with captions celebrating the experience.
From Boston.
In one post, she wrote something along the lines of "What a game," accompanied by a heart emoji and smiling photos of the two of them together. For many sports fans, that reaction felt unusual. In football culture, when your team loses an important match, especially a knockout game like the FA Cup, celebratory posts are not typically the norm. Fans usually express disappointment or simply stay quiet. That post added another layer of awkwardness to the situation. People online began commenting that it seemed tone-deaf. Instead of acknowledging the loss, the post came across as though the outcome didn't matter. Critics argued that it reinforced the idea that the entire appearance was more about optics than about genuine support for the team. But perhaps the most interesting part of this story isn't the game itself. It's the reaction from the public. On platforms like People magazine's website, where celebrity news articles often allow reader comments, the response was surprisingly harsh. Many of the comments were openly skeptical of the couple's display of affection. One commenter described the moment as performative nonsense, arguing that it looked like an obvious attempt to shift public opinion. Another commenter said bluntly that they didn't believe Blake at all. Someone else wrote that the two of them looked miserable despite trying to appear happy. One comment that circulated widely online said that their expression seemed more worried than joyful. According to that commenter, the photos didn't look like two people casually enjoying a game. Instead, they looked like two individuals under pressure, trying to present a united front while something bigger was happening behind the scenes. Another reader compared the couple's authenticity to a counterfeit designer bag sold on a street corner, suggesting that their public image felt completely manufactured. The comment went further, criticizing their handling of past controversies and arguing that public relations efforts would not be enough to repair their reputations. Now, it's important to remember that comment sections can sometimes amplify the loudest critics rather than represent the full range of public opinion. But even so, the tone of those responses showed just how divided the audience has become when it comes to Blake and Ryan. What makes this situation even more interesting is the contrast people have drawn between Blake and other public figures involved in similar controversies. Some observers pointed to the way Emily Baldoni supported her husband Justin Baldoni during his own legal proceedings. According to reports, Emily stood outside the settlement conference when she wasn't allowed in the room, offering visible support. That moment became a point of comparison online. Some commentators wondered whether Blake's trip to Wales was partly inspired by seeing how publicly supportive Emily had been toward her husband. The theory goes that Blake might have felt pressure to demonstrate the same level of loyalty. Of course, whether that interpretation is accurate is impossible to know. But it does highlight how closely every move these celebrities make is scrutinized by the public. And then there is the larger conversation about the dynamics of Blake and Ryan's relationship. Over the years, their marriage has often been presented as playful and humorous, especially through their social media interactions. They frequently tease each other online, post jokes, and share witty banter that fans find entertaining. However, critics argue that behind that comedic public image there might be a more complicated reality. Some commentators have suggested that Ryan's personality can come across as extremely dominant in both business and branding decisions. After all, Ryan has built an empire of ventures beyond acting, including marketing agencies, alcohol brands, telecommunications investments, and sports ownership. One of the most talked about decisions he made was purchasing Wrexham AFC alongside Rob McElhenney. According to stories circulating online, Blake reportedly was not deeply involved in that decision initially. Ryan and Rob purchased the club and began turning it into a major media project with documentaries and global attention. Running a football club, even one outside the Premier League, requires enormous time and financial commitment. Owners must travel frequently, attend meetings, manage investments, and oversee long-term strategies. It's not something that can be handled entirely from afar, and that has raised questions about how those responsibilities affect Ryan's time with his family. If he is spending months overseas filming movies and managing a sports club, that inevitably creates long periods of separation for some observers. Blake's trip to Wales symbolized the imbalance in that dynamic. She traveled across an ocean to support Ryan's project, yet critics pointed out that he has not always been equally visible when she needed support during difficult moments. Whether that perception is fair or not, it's part of the broader narrative that has been forming online about their relationship, but the football match and the public display of affection are only one part of the story. Because when you start digging into the background of Blake and Ryan's personal projects, especially their real estate ventures, you begin to see another side of how they navigate public interactions, and that brings us to a fascinating incident that took place several years ago during a planning board meeting in Lewisboro, New York. It's a story that reveals quite a bit about how Blake communicates when she's dealing with local officials and community members. At the time, Blake and Ryan were working through the approval process for a massive property project in Westchester County. They had purchased a large estate that included historic structures and surrounding land. The property itself was already enormous, featuring a multi-bedroom house, multiple cottages, stables, and acres of land. But that wasn't enough for the vision they had in mind. They wanted to build something even bigger, and in order to do that, they needed permission from the local planning board. What happened during that meeting, and the speech Blake gave to the board members, has since become a topic of discussion among people who analyze celebrity behavior and public relations, because according to the transcript of that meeting, Blake's remarks were memorable. So let's talk about what happened during that planning board meeting in Lewisboro, New York, because this moment gives people a very interesting glimpse into how Blake lively presents herself when she's speaking directly to local officials and residents rather than fans or Hollywood colleagues. At the time, Blake and Ryan had already purchased an enormous piece of land in the area. The property itself was impressive even before they began planning additional construction. It included acres of open land, older historic structures, cottages, and a large main house that had been standing there for decades. But Blake and Ryan had a much bigger vision for the property. They wanted to build a massive modern residence on the land, something far larger and far more elaborate than what was already there. The problem was that Lewisboro is a town that places a strong emphasis on preserving historical properties and maintaining the character of its neighborhoods. Many homes in the area date back generations, and local regulations often require special approval for major renovations or demolitions. Because the house on their property had historical ties, any changes had to go through the planning board. That meant attending meetings, presenting proposals, and convincing the board that their project would respect the character of the community. At one of those meetings in 2022, Blake herself showed up to speak. According to the meeting transcript, she began by greeting the planning board chair and the members in a very enthusiastic tone. She thanked them for their time and commented on how impressed she was with the work they were doing for the community. She even asked at one point whether serving on the planning board was a volunteer role, remarking on how much effort seemed to go into the job. On the surface, the comment sounded polite and appreciative. But some people who later read the transcript felt that her tone came across as a bit condescending, almost as if she was surprised that ordinary community members were dedicating so much time to local governance. Blake then began talking about how much she and Ryan loved the town of Lewisboro. She described it as one of the most beautiful places in the world and said that when people ask why they chose to live there, her response is always, "Why not?" She painted a picture of the area as a kind of peaceful paradise where they hope to raise their children surrounded by nature and privacy. She emphasized that they wanted to be positive contributors to the community and that their goal was to add to the town rather than take anything away from it. She spoke about sustainability, mentioning solar panels and environmentally conscious construction methods that they hope to incorporate into their plans. She also talked about her love of history and her interest in learning more about the background of the land they had purchased, but as the speech continued, the tone shifted in ways that caught some listeners off guard. Blake began explaining that while the existing structures on the property had historical value, they were not large enough to meet the needs of her family. She mentioned that she and Ryan already had 3 children and hinted that they might have more in the future. She talked about coming from a big family herself and about how their relatives frequently visit. According to the transcript, she joked that both her family and Ryan's family can sometimes drive them crazy, but that they still like having them around as often as possible. Because of that, she said, the small cottages on the property simply wouldn't provide enough space for everyone. The irony, of course, is that the property they had purchased was already enormous. The existing main house alone was around 7,500 square feet, with 7 bedrooms and 4.5 bathrooms. It featured cathedral ceilings, multiple fireplaces, hardwood floors, and a large kitchen. There were also additional cottages on the land, including one with 3 bedrooms, as well as stables, barns, and equestrian facilities. In total, the estate had more than enough room to host large gatherings. But Blake explained that their long-term plan involved building a completely new house that would better fit their lifestyle. She spoke enthusiastically about the land itself, mentioning how special it felt to have more than 100 acres of space where their children could grow up surrounded by nature. She said that after owning the property for several years, she was eager to finally start construction so that the family could move in and enjoy it fully. At one point she even joked about how quickly kids grow up and how she didn't want to waste any more time before building the home they envisioned. Throughout the speech, Blake repeatedly emphasized that they respected the history of the property and that they had no intention of tearing down certain older structures. She talked about preserving trees and repurposing wood for construction. She framed the project as something thoughtful and environmentally responsible. But critics later argued that the reality of the project looked quite different from the gentle picture she painted, because the proposal involved constructing a brand new house measuring roughly 14,000 square feet. And that was only the main residence. The plans also included additional structures such as a gym, a pool house, and guest accommodations. In other words, what they were proposing wasn't simply a family home. It was closer to a private compound. After Blake finished speaking, the technical portion of the meeting began. Her representative stepped in to explain the details of the proposal to the planning board. They discussed how the existing driveway would be used to access the new house, how the land would be divided into parcels, and where accessory buildings would be placed. Engineers described the soil testing that had been conducted to determine where septic systems and wells could be installed. They explained that one parcel would contain the new residence while other sections of the property would remain largely untouched. She spoke enthusiastically about the land itself, mentioning how special it felt to have more than 100 acres of space where their children could grow up surrounded by nature. She said that after owning the property for several years, she was eager to finally start construction so that the family could move in and enjoy it fully. At one point she even joked about how quickly kids grow up and how she didn't want to waste any more time before building the home they envisioned. Throughout the speech, Blake repeatedly emphasized that they respected the history of the property and that they had no intention of tearing down certain older structures. She talked about preserving trees and repurposing wood for construction. She framed the project as something thoughtful and environmentally responsible. But critics later argued that the reality of the project looked quite different from the gentle picture she painted, because the proposal involved constructing a brand new house measuring roughly 14,000 square feet. And that was only the main residence. The plans also included additional structures such as a gym, a pool house, and guest accommodations. In other words, what they were proposing wasn't simply a family home. It was closer to a private compound. After Blake finished speaking, the technical portion of the meeting began. Her representative stepped in to explain the details of the proposal to the planning board. They discussed how the existing driveway would be used to access the new house, how the land would be divided into parcels, and where accessory buildings would be placed. Engineers described the soil testing that had been conducted to determine where septic systems and wells could be installed. They explained that one parcel would contain the new residence while other sections of the property would remain largely untouched. The conversation turned to logistics, acreage calculations, easements, and how the property lines would be organized. There were discussions about the indoor pool that was planned for the property as well as the gym building. Essentially, the planning board had to consider whether this large new development would comply with local zoning rules and whether it would affect the surrounding environment. What made the situation particularly complicated was the fact that the existing house on the property was more than a century old. Built in the early 1920s, it carried historical significance within the community. The town had strict guidelines about modifying or demolishing buildings tied to its heritage. Because of that, Blake and Ryan needed special approvals and variances to move forward with their vision. That approval process turned out to be lengthy and complex. Years later, construction on the new house still wasn't fully completed. The project required multiple adjustments to the plans and ongoing negotiations with local authorities. Building a modern megamansion in a historic rural area is never simple, especially when the scale of the project is so large. Critics who learned about the proposal argued that the new house would clash with the architectural style of the surrounding homes. Many of the properties in Lewisboro are traditional and historic, while the new residence was reportedly designed with a much more contemporary aesthetic. For some residents, that raised concerns about preserving the character of the neighborhood, and that brings us back to the tone of Blake's original speech at the planning board meeting. While she repeatedly said that she wanted to be additives to the community, some listeners felt that the overall presentation came across as somewhat disconnected from the reality of what local residents experience. The idea of describing a 7,500 square foot home with 7 bedrooms as too small struck many people as out of touch. There was also the moment when she joked about wanting privacy and not wanting outsiders wandering near the property. While her concern about privacy is understandable given her celebrity status, critics interpreted the comment as implying that the local community itself should remain distant from their lives. In other words, they wanted to live in the town but remain largely invisible within it. For people analyzing celebrity behavior, the speech became an example of how public figures sometimes attempt to blend warmth with distance at the same time. Blake thanked the board members, praised the community, and emphasized shared values like sustainability and history. Yet at the same time, the scale of the project and the emphasis on privacy created the impression that the estate was being designed as a self-contained world where the family would rarely need to interact with the outside community. When commentators later compared this planning board moment with the recent public appearance at the Wrexham football match, they noticed a similar pattern. In both situations, Blake seemed to combine friendliness and enthusiasm with messaging that felt carefully curated. At the football game, the message was that she and Ryan were united and supportive of each other. At the planning meeting, the message was that they loved the town and wanted to contribute positively to it, but critics argue that these messages sometimes clash with the realities behind the scenes. For example, the idea that the couple needs even more space when they already own one of the largest properties in the area raises questions about scale and privilege. Likewise, the idea that a football match photo opportunity might help shape public perception about a marriage that has been under scrutiny shows just how closely celebrity image management is tied to public appearances. In the end, whether people see Blake Lively as charming and enthusiastic or as overly performative often depends on their perspective. Fans tend to interpret her speeches and public gestures as sincere. Critics, on the other hand, see them as strategic moves designed to influence public opinion. What is clear is that every detail of her actions is now being examined far more closely than it might have been a few years ago. The combination of legal controversies, public scrutiny, and viral commentary has created an environment where even something as simple as attending a football match or speaking at a town meeting becomes a topic of widespread debate, and that's why moments like the Wrexham appearance attract so much attention. They aren't just casual outings anymore. They're interpreted as signals, statements, and sometimes even attempts at narrative control. Whether the public ultimately accepts those signals is another question entirely, but for now, the story continues to unfold, and people online will keep analyzing every appearance, every speech, and every post looking for clues about what's really happening behind the scenes. So what do you think? Was Blake's speech to the planning board simply a friendly attempt to connect with the community, or did it come across as overly polished and out of touch? And when it comes to the Wrexham appearance, do you think the affection between Blake and Ryan looked genuine, or did it feel like a carefully staged moment meant to calm rumors? Let me know your thoughts down in the comments below. If you enjoyed this breakdown, don't forget to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications so you never miss an upload here on Coravanta. Thanks for watching.